Tonight, no end in sight. Israel pounds Rafah with unrelenting artillery strikes as the crisis in the region deepens. The World Court ordering a halt of all offensives. End in sight. India's elections edge closer to the final stretch, the rising heat causing polling to go at a slow but steady pace as Modi prepares for victory. Lethal landslides. Chaos in Papua New Guinea as hundreds are buried under surprise earth slips. Rescue efforts continue to dig through the rubble with waning hopes. Back to the skies. The first-class experience in the sky for man's best friend finally takes off. All that and more as World News Tonight starts right now.
This is Derana World News Tonight. Reporting from Colombo, here's Sanuvi Mudanayaka.
Good evening, you are joining us on World News Tonight. As the new week kicks off, we have a lot of updates to bring to you from around the world, from climate catastrophes to some delicate diplomacy moves. But first, we begin with the Israel-Palestine conflict. Israel warplanes and artillery pounded Rafah after the government dismissed an order by the top UN court to hold its military offensive in the southern Gaza city. Meanwhile, Hamas claimed to have captured an Israeli soldier during fighting in northern Gaza. Israel's military denied any soldiers had been captured.
The strike took place in Tel al-Sultan neighborhood in western Rafah, where thousands of people were taking shelter in tents. Dozens have been killed or injured in what Hamas described as a massacre and rushed to hospitals around the city. Many in Tel al-Sultan had recently fled the eastern areas of Rafah, where Israeli forces began a ground offensive earlier this month. On Sunday, the Israeli defense minister told troops in Rafah that their goal remained to destroy Hamas and return the hostages, ignoring an order by the International Court of Justice to end the offensive. Earlier on Sunday, Hamas launched at least 8 long-range rockets from Rafah on Tel Aviv, about 100 kilometers north. After Israel intercepted the missiles mid-air, there was some damage from shrapnel, like at this home north of Tel Aviv, but no reports of casualties.
Now back in our region, where neighbouring India continues with its elections, Indian voters braved temperatures of nearly 113 Fahrenheit in parts of the country as they headed to polling stations in the penultimate phase of the world's largest election. More than 111 million people were eligible to vote during this round.
While the heat in the capital New Delhi hovered around 107 degrees, but felt like 120 at 2 p.m. local time, the weather department said. Delhi voter Shekhar Kapoor feared the sweltering heat was putting people off. Many voters are questioning why polls were not held when the weather was more bearable. Paramedics were on hand with oral hydration salts at polling stations in Delhi, where mist machines, shaded waiting areas and cold water dispensers have also been installed by the Election Commission. Price rises and a lack of jobs were two of the major election issues mentioned by voters on Saturday. Among those casting their ballots in New Delhi early on Saturday were Rahul Gandhi, leader of the opposition Congress Party, who is the main rival of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Modi's Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party is expected to win a third consecutive term. Results are due on June 4th.
Still in Asia, we see some severe weather sweeping the region. Strong winds and heavy rain pounded the coast regions of Bangladesh and India as severe cyclone Remal made landfall, leaving millions without electricity after power poles fell and some trees were uprooted by gusty winds.
The Regional Meteorological Office in Calcutta reported that cyclone struck yesterday's evening and continued for about 5 hours. At least 4 people, 2 in India and 2 in neighbouring Bangladesh, have been killed since Remal struck. Both nations moved nearly 1 million people to storm shelters, about 800,000 of them in Bangladesh and roughly 110,000 in India. Authorities added reports of at least 356 uprooted electricity poles and damage to scores of transformers flowed in early during the storm's landfall in India. The year's first cyclone in the region is the latest of the frequent storms that have pounded the low-lying coast of South Asian neighbours in recent years as climate change drives up surface temperatures at sea.
And now on some diplomacy moves being made. Chinese Premier Li Qiang praised what he called a restart in relations with Japan and South Korea as he met their leaders for the first three-way talks in 4 years today in Seoul, striving to revive trade and security dialogues hampered by global tensions.
South Korean officials said that country President Yoon Suk-yeol, Chinese Premier Li Qiang, and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida will adopt a joint statement on 6 key areas, including economy and trade, science and technology, and people-to-people exchanges. Li hailed the talks as a, quote, restart and a new beginning. The rare summit comes amid global tensions that have strained trade and security dialogues between East Asia's economic powerhouses. China and U.S.-allied South Korea and Japan are trying to manage rising distrust amid the rivalry between Beijing and Washington and tensions over democratically ruled Taiwan, which China claims as its own. Yoon and Kishida have charted a closer course with each other and to Washington, embarking on unprecedented three-way cooperation with the United States on military and other measures. In bilateral talks a day earlier, Li and Kishida discussed Taiwan and agreed to hold a new round of bilateral high-level economic dialogue. Yoon and the Chinese premier agreed to a diplomatic and security dialogue and to resume free trade talks. Yoon also asked China to play a constructive role with its partners in North Korea, which is expanding its nuclear weapons and missile arsenal in defiance of the United Nations Security Council resolutions. Officials and diplomats from South Korea and Japan have set a low bar for the summit. They say it's uncertain whether there will be major announcements, but that the gathering will help the three countries reinvigorate their strained relations.
There is yet more Sino-Taiwan tensions as China's foreign ministry called on a U.S. lawmaker visiting Taiwan to stop violating the One China principle after he voiced support for Taiwan's defense in light of recent Chinese military drills. Senior U.S. lawmaker Michael McCaw said during a visit to Taipei that weapons Taiwan had ordered are finally on their way, and that China's intimidating war games last week underscored the need to boost the island's deterrence abilities. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Mao Ning, in response to McCall's remarks, said China had lodged concerns with the U.S. to stop using Taiwan to interfere in China's internal affairs. And over in South Korea, there is mounting dissent against the North as North Korea has announced its plans to launch a satellite between today and the 4th of June. South Korea's government strongly condemned the North, saying the launch is a provocative act that threatens regional security.
Another satellite launch warning by North Korea was issued early on Monday. Japan's Coast Guard received an email from the North that it plans to launch an artificial satellite between Monday and June 4th. Pyongyang also gave notice of 3 locations of potential danger following the launch. The projectile will likely fall in one of 3 places, 2 of which are in the southwestern area of the West Sea and 1 in the Pacific Ocean east of the Philippines. Here's what a South Korean military spokesperson had to say about the announcement.
North Korea's launch of a military reconnaissance satellite is a provocative act that violates UN Security Council resolutions. Our military will take measures to demonstrate its strong capabilities. South Korea, the US and Japan are working together in the case of the launch, and South Korea and the US are closely monitoring North Korea's moves.
The Ministry of Unification also told reporters on Monday such a satellite launch is a clear violation of a UN Security Council resolution that bans all missile launches using ballistic missile technologies. The ministry demanded that Pyongyang immediately halt its illegal satellite launch plans. North Korea previously launched a satellite back in November, which successfully entered orbit after failures in May and August. South Korean intelligence authorities said Pyongyang got help from Russia after the November launch. On Sunday, Yonhap News reported, citing a senior defense official, that a large number of Russian experts have entered the north to support its satellite launch efforts, saying a launch could be imminent ahead of the trilateral summit between Seoul, Tokyo, and Beijing.
Let's take a short commercial break. More world news on the other side. Welcome back. Lethal earth slips have ravaged the southern Western Pacific tonight. The UN Migration Agency estimated more than 670 people are assumed to have died in Papua New Guinea's massive landslide as rescue efforts continued. Only 5 bodies have been retrieved from the rubble so far.
At the foot of a mountain in the Enga province of Papua New Guinea, a village lays buried. More than 150 homes and hundreds of lives have been lost. Locals in shock and mourning have been combing through some 6 to 8 metres of soil in search of victims and survivors since the landslide struck on Friday. By Sunday, only 5 bodies had been recovered, all adults. Water power and major highways were cut off, hampering relief efforts. Local authorities were struggling to reach the site, leaving villagers isolated, using spades, agricultural forks and items on hand to dig. A convoy had travelled from the provincial capital to deliver food and supplies and to establish evacuation centres around the debris, with the local UN Migration Agency saying the area was still at risk. Enga, which is more than 600 kilometres from the capital Port Moresby, is home to several clans and farmers. Cultural issues are also a factor for relief workers, as tribal warfare is prominent in the region and along the main highway to deliver aid.
Updates on the Russia-Ukraine conflict now. A Russian attack on Kharkiv killed 14 and injured dozens. The regional governor reported that 2 guided bombs hit the epicenter DIY hypermarket in a residential area of the city. This comes with Putin's arrival in Uzbekistan on his 3rd foreign trip since re-election.
Local officials said at least 120 people were in the epicenter hypermarket on Saturday when 2 guided bombs struck, causing a massive fire. This surveillance video shows the moment they hit. At least 10 of the dead were unidentified on Sunday morning, they said. In a post on the Telegram app, Ukraine's Interior Minister Ihor Klimenko said 16 people were still missing after the strike. It took 16 hours to extinguish the flames, which raged over an area of more than 15,000 square yards, he said. The past week has seen a rise in Russian strikes on Ukraine's second city, after Russian troops stormed across the border, opening a new front just north of it. President Volodymyr Zelensky issued a plea to Ukraine's Western allies to help boost air defences to keep cities safe. A separate early Saturday evening missile strike hit a residential building in the centre of the city of 1.3 million, wounding at least 25 people. Russia has bombarded Kharkiv, which lies less than 20 miles from its border, throughout the war, having reached the outskirts in a failed attempt to capture it in 2022. Rescuers, medics and journalists occasionally had to rush away from the scene of both strikes and take cover on the ground, for fear of another one, as has occurred during several recent Russian attacks. Moscow denies deliberately targeting civilians, but thousands have been killed and injured in the 27 months since it invaded Ukraine.
We're in the UK, where the campaigning continues as the election looms. In his latest election campaign message, Britain's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said his party would introduce mandatory national service for 18-year-olds if it wins the national election on the 4th of July. His ruling Conservatives are lagging in poll opinions. For more on that, we have other Derana World News special correspondent Clifford Pereira from Yorkshire in the UK.
In a video posted by the Conservative Party on the social media platform X, Sunak said the mandatory service could be military or community-based, as young adults could choose between spending 1 week a month volunteering over the course of a year, or take up one of 30,000 spaces to spend a year in the armed forces. The announcement followed Labour Party leader Keir Starmer's comments on Saturday that he was in favour of allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. Sunak's Conservative lagged Labour by a wide margin in opinion polls, which have shown little change in fortunes for the Prime Minister since his surprise election call last Wednesday. Labour also has said there will be no rises in income tax or national insurance if it wins the general election, but some spending cuts have not been ruled out.
Thank you. That was other Derana World News special correspondent Clifford Pereira from Yorkshire in the UK. Some more delicate diplomacy is being carried out, this time in Europe. Emmanuel Macron began on Sunday the first state to visit Germany by a French president in a quarter century, bringing a plea to defend democracy against nationalism at the coming European Parliament elections.
French President Emmanuel Macron arrived in Berlin on Sunday for a three-day state visit, where he met with German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier at the presidential palace. This marks the first French presidential state visit to Germany in 24 years. Macron highlighted the importance of the Franco-German relationship, playing a key role in Europe as the bloc's two biggest powers, despite the very different leadership styles that he and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz have. The talks were followed by a bilateral cabinet meeting ahead of next month's EU parliamentary elections, with major challenges facing EU policymakers, including the Ukraine war and the November US presidential election.
And on the road to the White House tonight, polls show former President Donald Trump and President Joe Biden are in a neck-and-neck contest headed into the November election, with Biden losing support in key Democratic strongholds and crucial swing states that solidified his 2020 win. Meanwhile, Trump attended the Libertarian National Convention over the weekend and was met with a sour response. For more on this, we have other Derana World News special correspondent Nicola Senaratne from New York in the US.
The latest national survey shows Trump leading by 2 points, 44% to 46% for Trump. Biden is up 9 points in New York after beating Trump there by 23 points in 2020. And he leads Trump by 21 points in California, a 9-point dip compared to 2020. Polls consistently show Trump leads Biden in most of the 7 crucial swing states that will likely decide the election, all of which Biden won narrowly in 2020, with the exception of North Carolina. On a national scale, other May polls show Trump and Biden are virtually tied. The latest polls show that the Israel-Hamas war is dividing Biden's base, with 44% of registered Democratic voters saying they will disapprove of him handling of the conflict.
Thank you. That was other Derana World News special correspondent Nicola Senaratne from New York in the US. Turbulence continues to cause trouble across all skies recently. 12 people were injured after a Qatar Airways flight from Doha to Dublin was hit with turbulence and wind shears. The flight, which landed in Dublin shortly before 1 p.m. local time, was met by emergency services, including airport police and the fire and rescue department.
Qatar Airways flight QR017 flying from Doha to Dublin, Ireland on Sunday hit turbulence mid-flight, resulting in injuries for 12 passengers aboard. While Qatar Airways did not comment on the turbulence directly, saying that the matter is a subject to an internal investigation, the company released a statement saying that a small number of passengers and crew sustained minor injuries and are receiving treatment. Irish broadcaster RTE interviewed passengers arriving at the airport and said that the turbulence lasted for only around 20 seconds but occurred during the food and drink service. According to Dublin Airport, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner landed safely and as scheduled shortly before 1 p.m. local time.
Let's go in for a short commercial break. More world news right after this. Welcome back. We previously brought to you the story of an avid entrepreneur and his plans to provide man's best friend with a luxurious experience in the skies. Well, the preparations are finally complete and the puppy plane is ready for takeoff with its maiden flight.
In the US, a new airline called Bark Air, aimed at providing a first-class experience for the dog, a business-class experience for people, will take its maiden flight from New York to Los Angeles on Thursday. CEO Matt Meeker said that he created the company to cater to dogs of all sizes to ensure comfort and a fear-free experience on an airplane. Meeker said that he had the idea for 10 years after he personally experienced difficulty transporting his Great Dane. Bark Air aims to sell 10 tickets per flight for 10 dogs to travel in luxury in a 15-person capacity aircraft. Dogs will be offered an onboard spa and luxurious menus such as barcachinos and doggy champagne. Tickets will cost $8,000 for a one-way international flight to London and $6,000 for domestic flights between LA and New York City.
Well, that is all the stories we have to report to you tonight on World News. Tune in again tomorrow for more key updates from across the globe. Thank you for watching. Good night.